Greetings, anointed ones. The reason a group is required to continue explaining why you are the problem is usually because reality no longer aligns with their viewpoints. All locations exhibit a peculiar pattern. Families, workplaces, churches, online spaces, and even whole communities. One person is repeatedly singled out, the subject of constant debate, the target of constant attacks, and the object of constant criticism. The attacks continue even if the individual leaves, improves, remains silent, or simply outgrows the environment. In reality, the assaults often become more pronounced rather than sharper. Increased volume. That is not an expression of confidence. That is exposure. The majority of people never connect with real life, which is a well-documented psychological fact. The only time a group harbors long-term hostility toward an individual is when that individual undermines the group's common belief system. This isn't because the individual is aggressive or loud. Rather, their presence subtly contradicts the group's collective beliefs about itself. Once the contradiction is apparent, the group is given two options: attack or evolve. The second option is the most commonly chosen. It's less expensive. There is no need for self-reflection. Also, let us be honest for a moment. They would have moved on if you were truly insignificant. Nobody continues to convene meetings for someone who is no longer relevant. Nobody rehearses the same story for months or years unless there is a part of that person that refuses to disappear. The use of silence would have been effective at this point. Distance would have been sufficient. When there is no truth to counteract, smear campaigns usually fade away quickly. But here you are, still standing, intact, and being debated like a community project that will not fail. When people start to notice patterns, they become uneasy. The attacks do not evolve, however, you do. The accusations are fixed in time, but your life is not. The story they tell about you requires ongoing maintenance, similar to an antiquated generator that only operates when the cord is pulled. Every time they retrieve it, more people notice and wonder why they are still talking about this person. Add a touch of cynicism to the equation. The pressure that was supposed to expose you eventually exposed them. Cracking was anticipated. They achieved consistency. They anticipated collapse. They received clarification. That is not the intended outcome of these stories. At least not for the faction that thought they had the upper hand. As a result, if a community is unable to stop attacking you, even though it is logical and should have stopped long ago, it is not a coincidence. That is confirmation in slow motion, and regardless of their preferences, they are compelled to watch an unexpected event. The realization that you were not the problem they were attempting to pinpoint. Your presence was a sign of who truly had one. Indeed, nothing can bring people together more quickly than a common adversary. However, nothing can degrade a group more quickly than discovering that the enemy they chose is not disintegrating in accordance with the planned timeline. 1. Their obsession with lowering your reputation is not motivated by animosity. Panic ensues after the narrative disintegrates. Everything was going well for them at first. They were responsible for the narrative, tone, and labels associated with your name. The attacks seemed straightforward, as long as people accepted the version of you they presented. They did not need to provide much evidence because the environment did the work for them. However, an alteration occurred, and it was neither noisy nor dramatic. Time intervened. The accusations were inconsistent with the behavior. The results did not support the narrative. You continued to progress in a way that was not consistent with your intended identity. At that point, panic took precedence over confidence. individuals do not always acknowledge the collapse of a narrative. They increase their bet. This is why the assaults became repetitive instead of sharp. You will notice that they stopped providing new information and instead began to recycle the same claims. Don't. That is a clear indication that the belief has been undermined. Consistent reinforcement would be unnecessary if the narrative was robust. Reminders are unnecessary for the truth. Lies exist. They were more disturbed by the fact that you did not have to defend yourself than by the fact that you did. Your consistency communicated without your intent. While they continued to elaborate on your identity, you continued to demonstrate the opposite. That division created pressure, which reveals motives. At that point, the focus shifted from accountability or correction to control. They were no longer striving to protect the community. They were attempting to preserve the narrative that had provided them with comfort. They also underestimated your emotional endurance. Fatigue is the root cause of the majority of attacks. The strategy is straightforward. Continue to apply pressure until the individual reacts, collapses, or confirms the narrative of frustration. Some confusion ensued when this did not occur. Individuals who anticipate a response are unsure of how to manage their restraint. Consequently, the volume increases. Not because it is effective, but because it is the only remaining option. That is why the obsession appears to be excessive. You're watching people deal with an already evolved version of reality. They are disputing outcomes, not opinions. They are aware of this fact in their hearts. Panic does not indicate dread. There appears to be a sense of urgency. It appears that people are attempting to repair an already defective item by pretending that it is working properly. The attacks continue because they would have to face the truth if they stopped. The narrative was unsuccessful, but you were not. 2. They are compelled to acknowledge that your endurance has defied their preconceived notions about you. They were not simply observing you from the start. They were examining you. Their minds were capturing every reaction, delay, and error. They had a hypothesis about how you would fracture. It is possible that you will experience an explosion. Perhaps you'd plead. It is possible that you will become so spiteful, reckless, or desperate as to prove their innocence. That theory was not arbitrary. It was painstakingly built by studying the behavior of others under duress. It was anticipated that you would stick to the same script. The majority of people do. However, the experiment was hampered by endurance. You continued to arrive in your entirety, with no indication of performance or loudness. They were more concerned by this than by any argument, because the pressure did not transform you into an unsightly creature. Excuses become ineffective when endurance is introduced. You failed to win because you overwhelmed them. You emerged victorious after surviving the frame in which they attempted to trap you. Time, however, fundamentally undermined their theory. For a week or two, anyone can pretend to be strong. During months of being misinterpreted, targeted, and discussed behind closed doors, only a small number of individuals can maintain their composure. Endurance exposes the truth. It was evident that this was the case. The version of you that they anticipated never materialized. Meltdown absent. There was no public collapse. There was no behavior that they could point to and assert, this is who they truly are. That necessitated them to assume an inconvenient position. They were no longer able to assert that they were responding to your actions, as your actions remained consistent. Consequently, the emphasis was redirected. They began to respond to your mere existence. I became skeptical of your composure. Your reticence became calculated. When endurance cannot be explicitly addressed, it is reinterpreted as a negative attribute. This is how you determine that the theory was unsuccessful. However, they find it exceedingly challenging to acknowledge that endurance is beyond dispute. Speeches or explanations are unnecessary. It continues indefinitely. Their conclusions appear to be weakened as time progresses. They anticipated that the burden would expose your deficiencies. Rather, it exposed their preconceived notions. Fighting back did not establish any evidence. You disproved everything by failing to meet their expectations. And once that happens, it's impossible to ignore, especially for those who were paying close attention. The assaults intensified as a result of your presence, revealing hidden hierarchies. In some situations, unspoken rules are enforced. Who is granted grace? Who is safeguarded? Who is subjected to investigation? Who is overlooked? The system appears to be stable as long as everyone fulfills their assigned responsibilities. When you arrived in your entirety, without performance or bending, those quiet rankings began to sway. Not because you directly challenged them, but because your presence revealed certain advantages. You did not have to confront the leadership or publicly criticize anyone. The imbalance manifested organically. Individuals noted who was allowed to make mistakes and still receive defense, and who was not. Individuals who could speak freely without fear of repercussions were observed, as well as those who had to scrutinize every word. When those patterns emerge, authority becomes vulnerable. That is the point at which pressure is applied to restore order rather than fairness. Initially, the attacks were not personal. They were corrective. You were demoted to a lower position without anyone recognizing the existence of a hierarchy. Frustration ensued when that failed. They discreetly assigned you a lane, and you remained outside of it. You weren't playing the role of the manageable voice or the appreciative outsider. That refusal demonstrated the extent to which they valued control. What exacerbated the situation was how others reacted to you. People listened without intending to. They were attentive. Your consistency broke the cycle of automatic loyalty, not because you demanded it. Unspoken power structures become concerned when influence is exerted without authorization. Influence is intended to be granted from the top down rather than discovered organically. As a result, the attacks intensified not to suppress you, but to serve as a warning to everyone else. This is the result of an individual failing to maintain their designated position. Communities care more about maintaining hierarchies than about truth. Once that reality is revealed, any individual who shares it becomes a problem that must be addressed. The irony is that the hierarchy became more obvious as their attacks on you escalated. People could see who was being defended without evidence and who was being questioned without cause. The system was self-reporting. You didn't deconstruct anything. You disclosed it. Its hold weakens when power is revealed rather than assumed. This is why your presence cannot be tolerated in silence. Your words did not make them feel threatened. It was the clarity you brought to a space that relied on invisibility to stay alive. They are surrounded by their own invoices. Initially, all of their statements about you were grounded in the present. Loose statements, confident opinions, and bold claims that require no support because they are unlikely to be challenged in the future. The entire conversation was delivered as if time did not matter. However, time is a constant factor. Contrary to popular belief, conversations do not disappear. Messages are retained. Reactions are memorable. Patterns emerge whether or not anyone intends them to. Your response is not the source of their current conflict. Consistency is essential. Their current actions contradict previous statements. When compared to the actual results, their previously confident claims appear exaggerated, emotional, or outright false. They needed you to fail, spiral, or be exposed in order to tell the story they had about you. None of these events occurred. Rather, the receipts began to point back to them. Panic manifests itself in the form of defensiveness at that time. You will notice abrupt changes to history. Statements like, "That is not what I intended," "You are misinterpreting the context," or "The situation was different then," are not clarifications. They function as evacuation routes. When people feel trapped by their own words, they refrain from correcting themselves. They obscure the record. However, the clearer the trail, the more difficult it becomes. They are uncomfortable in this situation because they can't accuse you of manipulation without revealing their own inconsistency. They spoke freely because they believed no one would remember. Memory now has significance. The use of screenshots is not considered an argument. Timelines don't become emotional. Patterns are impartial. They remain silently in place, contradicting the current narrative. Furthermore, they failed to anticipate this aspect. You were not required to collect evidence in an aggressive manner. Life completed it for you. When an individual repeatedly assaults another person, documentation is automatically generated. Each new accusation complicates the record even more. Each overreaction exacerbates the discrepancy between their words and reality. Cornering does not always indicate remorse. It sometimes appears to be a manifestation of rage. Occasionally, it appears to be satirical. At times, it appears that the intention is to completely undermine the concept of evidence. However, the fundamental issue remains unaffected. The past will not be concealed. The invoices are tangible and do not require interpretation. They simply demonstrate that the statements made at the time were incapable of withstanding the manifestations of the present. Their unity is artificial, as it is maintained solely by a common adversary. Initially, the group appears to be well-organized, loyal, and cohesive. They appear to share a common purpose, cause, or rhythm. However, upon closer examination, it is clear. Respect, shared vision, and integrity are not the adhesives that hold them together. It's the fear of losing the narrative they've built around you. Their unity is contingent on a single factor: someone to accuse, someone to attack, and someone to keep their position without having to face their own flaws. You became that factor. After you ceased to be under their control, the group's entire structure became unstable. Cracks have appeared in previously cohesive conversations. Alliances shift, loyalties become transactional, and the group's self-confidence erodes as people argue quietly. They are unable to maintain their unity in the absence of assaults and a common goal. This is why the assaults continue to happen. It's no longer about you. It relates to the preservation of their delicate structure. The irony is savage. Although they anticipated that the attacks would reduce your visibility, the opposite happened. Each attempt to control or discredit you demonstrates the hollowness of their unity. Their purported strength was dependent on your perceived vulnerability. And as your presence persists in defying the narrative, they are forced to confront a reality they cannot change. They are only united because of your presence, not despite themselves. This tension was not caused by you. You simply existed. You exposed the invisible fault lines by remaining steadfast, consistent, and unwavering. Their alliances, hierarchies, and purported loyalty are dependent on the villain's ability to maintain them. If that adversary is defeated, they will be forced to face their own shortcomings. The louder their attacks, the clearer it is that their solidarity is performative. Every overreaction, recycled accusation, and desperate attempt to rally others serves to highlight the truth. They are a group united by opposition rather than authenticity. The community's foundation was never based on principles or character, as evidenced by their desperate attempts to maintain control while failing to diminish you. It was an issue of survival. When the goal refuses to cooperate, survival always appears to be a tangled web. They are being forced to admit that you did not recruit followers. Rather, they formed witnesses organically. You were not a major influence. A speech, campaign, or explanation was unnecessary. People began to notice you, not because you told them to, but because they couldn't get over the way you navigated life, the decisions you made, and the poise with which you conducted yourself. That alone is terrifying for a group that thrives on control. They believe that influence, attention, and loyalty will be obtained on the terms of others. You unintentionally violated all of that. Witnesses in your vicinity did not participate in order to back up a claim. They did not sign up for a cause. They simply observed and understood a phenomenon that the attackers refused to acknowledge. Silent recognition is the most inconvenient because it is difficult to discredit. The group has the ability to verbally assault you, misrepresent your actions, and spread lies. However, they are powerless to stop people from seeing what they have already seen. Organic growth is indicative of genuine recognition. So, under pressure, artificial loyalty becomes ineffective. This is why the assaults continue to escalate rather than decrease. Your mere existence is not enough. Individuals independently recognize and verify your integrity. Your presence acts as a benchmark, a silent standard that reveals the authenticity of one's actions, or lack thereof. The truth about your character is already obvious to those who pay attention, so any attempt to manipulate perception is futile. It cannot be forged or eliminated. They are dealing with this issue because they believe they have the ability to control it. That acknowledgement is contingent on their consent. However, when it happens naturally, the entire power dynamic is reversed. The attackers become increasingly agitated as more people quietly acknowledge what they see. Each assault is an unsuccessful attempt to change reality. Each reaction demonstrates that your consistency cannot be explained by their regulations. The most humiliating aspect for them was that you were not expected to guide or persuade anyone. You neither orchestrated admiration nor coerced comprehension. It was established as a result of your identity, not their expectations of your abilities. The realization that your mere presence drew a following without any effort forces them to confront the one truth they cannot deny. You are recognized because you earned it effortlessly, and nothing they do will change that. 7. The attacks indicate that they examined you more thoroughly than they ever did themselves. Curiosity is rarely the motivator for a community's fixation on an individual. It is a matter of control. They believe that gaining a comprehensive understanding of you will allow them to predict and manipulate you. As a result, they organize your routines, analyze your words, scrutinize your decisions, and memorize your patterns. They devote time, energy, and mental bandwidth to scrutinizing every action you take, while conveniently ignoring the obvious contradictions in their own behavior. The irony is savage. Their frustration is exacerbated by the fact that they understand you better than they do themselves. Their assaults become frantic because they realize you are untouchable in the ways that matter. They have done enough research on you to realize that evidence, truth, and consistency are on your side. However, they have not done enough research on themselves to make the necessary changes. Every accusation, slander, or rumor they spread is based on their assumptions rather than reality. By focusing so heavily on you, they have become trapped in a cycle of comparison, constantly comparing their perception of you to your actual presence and consistently failing to reconcile the two. This over-analysis exposes their vulnerability. The more they monitor, the clearer their obsession becomes. They try to anticipate your responses, but they are frequently incorrect, and this erratic behavior undermines their entire framework. They anticipate control because they have studied patterns. However, studying someone does not always imply understanding them, and this discrepancy is the root of their lack of confidence. In the meantime, they remain unaware of their own hypocrisy. They have not conducted as thorough an examination of their motives, insecurities, or weaknesses as they have of yours. Their mental energy is expended in an effort to refute your claims, while evidence of their own contradictions accumulates in silence. This is the most obvious evidence of the attacks. The obsession does not stem from a perceived threat. It is about them admitting that they have spent more time and energy scrutinizing your life than comprehending their own. That realization is terrifying for them because it implies that all of their strategies, narratives, and claims to superiority are rendered ineffective when confronted with the simple fact that they are acting out of fixation rather than wisdom. The more they attack, it becomes clear that they are fighting with themselves rather than with you. 8. They are being forced to admit that you have outgrown the role they have assigned you. They saw you from the start as the ideal candidate for a meticulously crafted container. They determined your behavior, the extent to which you could advance, the scope of your influence, and the failures that would make you human enough for their liking. The goal of each boundary they established was to keep you predictable, contained, and manageable. However, you did not remain in that container. You grew beyond it in ways they couldn't predict or regulate. Your development is not overly dramatic or performative. It's consistent, irrefutable, and organic. Each achievement, every calm response, and every quiet display of integrity chipped away at their expectations. And that is the source of their rage. They did not simply want to restrict you. They wanted to establish your boundaries. You forced them to engage in a moment of brutal honesty by refusing to conform. The narrative they had created about you was no longer relevant. The position they had assigned was no longer in existence. This revelation is unbearable for a group that values certainty. Their attacks become more intense, not because they are exposing your flaws, but because they are desperately trying to reintegrate you into the framework they have created. Every insult, rumor, and attempt at manipulation demonstrates that they are grappling with the truth. They do not have control over your trajectory. So, they expected compliance, but were met with independence. The kind of independence that highlights their own reliance on control. When they outgrow the role, their assumptions become apparent to anyone paying attention. Observers notice the difference between their attempts to control your behavior and your true self. When a person consistently exceeds expectations, refuses to be confined, and operates from a place of authenticity, it is impossible to hide. The frustration is exacerbated by the fact that the evidence is visible to everyone, including the individual in question. Finally, you outgrew not only your role, but also their ability to understand you. Furthermore, acknowledging that an individual has overcome the constraints they have imposed is infuriating, humiliating, and disorienting. Your development provided irrefutable evidence that they were never entitled to control, a fact they will continue to deny for as long as possible. 9. The attacks are an attempt to elicit an aspect of yourself that is no longer present. The people who are attacking you aren't just reacting to your current identity. In response to pressure, they are acting on their expectations of your behavior or their goals for your development. They've created a mental image of you that will either confirm every accusation they've ever made, panic, lash out, or collapse. Their attacks are carefully planned to elicit that response. Every insult, manipulation, and rumor is a trap set to capture a version of you that only exists in their imagination. The issue for them is that the version no longer exists. Their outdated strategies are rendered obsolete by your changes, adaptations, and evolution. You respond calmly in situations where they anticipate disorder. They anticipate a breakdown while you remain calm. You maintain your cool in situations where they expect unpredictable reactions. Each attack is aimed at an empty target because the person they believe they are familiar with was never genuine. The version of you they are attempting to provoke has been replaced by someone who is far more powerful, aware, and resistant to manipulation. This is the source of their frustration. They're fighting a ghost, but they can't give up control. The attacks persist due to the fact that abandoning them would necessitate acknowledging that their assumptions were incorrect. They are unable to accept this because of their pride and ego. Every predictable attempt at provocation and every recycled accusation reveals their own desperation. They are desperately attempting to create cracks in the surface that do not exist, forcing you to respond in a way that you refuse to do. In the meantime, the gap between expectation and reality grows wider with each failure to elicit a response. It is also noticed by observers. The community recognizes that their tactics are ineffective, that the chaos they promised has not materialized, and that the calm, measured individual they attempted to control is thriving despite their efforts. They expose their vulnerability more than yours by attacking a version of you that no longer exists. The more they try to elicit a response, the clearer it becomes that their power was never real, and that the genuine you cannot be bent, manipulated, or broken by the antiquated strategies they cling to. Their attacks are echoes of a failed experiment, and with each one, your strength becomes more apparent to everyone watching. They are being forced to admit that you never needed their approval to stay together. Their attacks were designed from the start to break you, make you doubt yourself, and force you to rely on their judgment or validation. They assumed that constant criticism, gossip, and pressure would cause you to crumble, beg, or at the very least conform to their desired image. Most attacks are based on this assumption. People cannot thrive without approval, and silence or endurance are impossible under scrutiny. But you didn't follow their rules. You remained whole, steady, and unshaken regardless of their validation. That reality scares them. They spent so much time believing that their judgment was important, that their opinions influenced outcomes, and that their approval defined you. Every calculated attack was intended to remind you of your place in their storyline. When that didn't work, they increased the volume, aggression, and franticness of their actions. The louder they screamed, the more obvious it became that your stability never depended on them. They weren't facing weakness. They were confronting autonomy. And it is impossible to bully someone who does not rely on you for survival. The frustration is evident in how predictable and repetitive their attacks become. When someone relies on your approval, one attack is sufficient. However, when someone does not, every tactic fails, forcing them to repeat the same strategies in the hope that one will work. Their obsession grows as they witness something they cannot control. A person thriving without ever requiring permission or consent from the very voices attempting to bring them down. Your independence also requires them to look in the mirror, whether they want to or not. Their belief that they possessed power is exposed as false. They understand that all attempts to define or shape you have failed. They attack to gain control. But the truth is in your presence calm, unwavering, and unshakable. And that is conclusive proof that you were never dependent on their approval in the first place. By refusing to succumb to their judgment, you not only survive, but also highlight their incompetence. They are forced to watch someone live their lives without regard for their opinions, and the realization that their influence was never required becomes a silent, unbearable reality. The repeated attacks are rehearsals for convincing themselves, not the public. When a group repeatedly attacks you, it is not because they want everyone else to believe their version of events. The public frequently senses the disconnect between accusation and reality. The attacks are primarily intended to reassure the perpetrators that the narrative they created is still relevant. Every insult, rumor, and recycled argument is less about you than about reinforcing their own sense of control. They tell the same story because they know it is shaky. If it was solid, there would be no need to go over it repeatedly. The constant repetition is a psychological rehearsal, a desperate attempt to persuade oneself that the truth remains consistent with their perception. Each cycle of attack is intended to erase any doubt that has already crept in. They want to drown out their own guilt, fear, and the growing realization that you have escaped their tactics unscathed. What makes this even more revealing is how obvious it becomes to everyone who watches. When attacks are genuine and rational, they progress. They adapt. They present new evidence or shift the focus depending on the circumstances. However, repeated attacks with no change indicate panic and insecurity. They are practicing a version of reality that only exists in their minds, attempting to create certainty where there is none. Meanwhile, you're unaffected. You do not play along. You do not mirror their fear or aggression. You simply exist and refuse to validate their false narratives. And that is why the repetition is so humiliating for them. Every new attack admits that the previous ones were ineffective, that their assumptions were incorrect, and that the reality they refuse to confront is unfolding without their control. Ultimately, repeated attacks reveal more about the attackers than the targets. They are a confession in motion, a cycle of insecurity attempting to convince itself that it is still correct. And as long as you remain steady, the rehearsals reveal their vulnerability, demonstrating that the only person they're attempting to control is their own failing perception and loss. They are forced to see how the environment poisoned others, but not you. Most communities, groups, or networks shape people unconsciously. Gossip, manipulation, favoritism, and subtle pressure. It all seeps in quietly, shaping behavior, bending morals, and revealing flaws over time. The attackers assumed you would succumb like everyone else. They expected the environment to leave an imprint on you, to erode your composure, integrity, and confidence until you were just another product of the system they controlled. They failed to account for the fact that you absorbed no toxins from their environment. Every attempt to taint, confuse, or manipulate you has failed. While others became defensive, petty, or opportunistic, you remained focused. Your perspective, decisions, and integrity remained intact. That alone disrupts their entire worldview. They anticipate conformity because it is simpler for them to measure, control, and predict. When this does not occur, they are forced to face an uncomfortable truth. Their power is not universal, nor is their influence absolute. Watching you thrive under the same pressure that has bent everyone else is deeply humiliating for them. Every outburst, attack, and rumor now feels like proof that their system didn't work as they expected. They are forced to observe the contrast. The environment they used to shape and control people, which worked for almost everyone, failed you in some way. And the failure is not yours. It is theirs. It reveals how heavily they relied on control rather than merit, influence over resilience. The irony is that they are still attempting to change the narrative, making you appear compromised and attacking the one person who escaped the trap they created. The harder they try, the more obvious it becomes to everyone who watches. Their efforts to tarnish your reputation have emphasized your strength and independence. You did not simply survive their toxicity. You exposed its selective impact, demonstrating that no matter how carefully they try to manipulate a system, someone who is grounded in reality cannot be reshaped. And that is the source of their anxiety. You became a living contradiction, proof that their power is limited and that the environment they trusted to shape everyone else could not affect you. Their inability to replace you demonstrated your irreplaceability. The people attacking you assumed that if they removed you, someone else would step in to fill the void. They expected the void to be easily filled, and that the role, influence, or presence you possessed could be replicated by another face, voice, or personality. That assumption quickly revealed itself to be false. Every attempt to replace you failed, and with each failure, your unrivaled position became clear. It's not about being liked, popular, or loud. It's about the consistency, integrity, and undeniable presence you brought that no one else could match. Others could imitate your actions or words, but the impact, the gravity of your character, the quiet command of attention and respect could not be replicated. That realization shook the very foundations of those who attacked you, demonstrating that their strategy was not only flawed, but also irrelevant. They weren't dealing with a component in a system. They were dealing with someone unique, someone essential. Every failed replacement made them more agitated. Every time they attempted to insert a substitute, it became clear not only to them but to everyone watching that what you brought to the table could not be replicated. That failure demonstrates their reliance on structure and hierarchy over genuine understanding or talent. Their strategy was always predicated on the assumption that control could be restored by swapping out a person. You defied that assumption simply by existing in a way that no one else could match. The irony is sharp. The more they attempt to discredit you, the more obvious your irreplaceability becomes. They believed they could erase or weaken your presence, but their actions only emphasized the void you fill. Observers can see the difference. The contrast between you and those who attempted to take your place highlights that they cannot control your authenticity, consistency, and the natural impact you have on the environment. Finally, their attacks became proof of your singularity. Every failed attempt to replace you revealed the truth that they never wanted to face. You weren't just another part of the system that they believed they controlled. You were the one they couldn't replicate, the one they couldn't contain, and the one whose absence or misrepresentation revealed their incompetence. Your irreplaceability was not just obvious. It was unavoidable, and the truth haunts every action they take against you. 14. They are forced to accept that the attack season ended with your confirmation rather than your destruction. All of the attacks, plotting, and endless attempts to discredit you were supposed to end in a way that benefited them, confirmed their narrative, and caused you to collapse under pressure. They anticipated a period of chaos that would leave you diminished, broken, or at least shaken. Instead, that season ended with your confirmation, not destruction, but unequivocal validation of who you are. Every move they made, every rumor spread, and every whisper behind closed doors now proves that you survived, endured, and remained whole in the face of adversity. This realization is devastating to them because it changes the entire dynamic. What was once intended as proof of weakness is now proof of strength. Every attack intended to expose flaws revealed their obsession, fear, and the limits of their control. The narrative they worked hard to build crumbled under the weight of your consistency, restraint, and the simple fact that you refused to play by their rules. Oh, in attempting to break you, they unintentionally documented your integrity, demonstrating to anyone paying attention that the accusations were baseless and the attacks were desperate. The confirmation is not flashy. It is not loud or showy. It's steady, undeniable, and lived quietly over time. Your actions, your calm, and your continued presence in the face of repeated attacks created a record they cannot erase. Every observer can see it. The community may still argue, the attackers may still insist, but reality refuses to bend. The story they expected to end with your downfall now ends with their exposure and your quiet triumph. They are forced to accept it because nothing else explains the gap between expectation and reality. The attacks were designed to destroy, but destruction never came. Instead, the season of hostility confirmed your endurance, your influence, and your unshakable presence. Every move they made, every effort to hurt or manipulate you, now circles back as proof, not of failure on your part, but of their inability to control, predict, or diminish someone who refused to comply with their narrative. That is the final blow. Realizing the campaign meant to erase you became the confirmation that set you apart. Conclusion. The truth is simple, but unsettling. The more a community attacks you, the more obvious it becomes that their efforts say less about you and more about them. Every insult, every rumor, every repeated accusation is a reflection of their fear, their need for control, and their failure to understand a person who refuses to conform to their narrative. You were never just a target. You were a mirror, a disruptor, a living contradiction to the assumptions they held about power, influence, and obedience. They expected to see cracks, weakness, and compromise. Instead, they witnessed endurance, clarity, and integrity. Their attacks weren't successful because you didn't play the part they assigned. You became the proof that their strategies, their hierarchies, and their narratives could not contain someone who operates from truth. Across every attempt to discredit you, one thing became undeniable. Your presence changes the game. It forces people to confront their own hypocrisy, exposes artificial unity, and reveals their obsession with control. You didn't just survive their campaigns. You thrived despite them. Each attack intended to break you ended up documenting your strength. Each effort to provoke a reaction highlighted your restraint. Each attempt to replace or diminish you emphasized your irreplaceable role. And in the end, the season of attacks did not culminate in destruction as they had hoped. It culminated in confirmation. Confirmation that you are resilient, steadfast, and untouchable by narratives that rely on fear and falsehood. This is the power of existing authentically. You don't have to fight on their terms. You don't have to bend to expectations or seek their approval. Simply by staying consistent, measured, and true to yourself, you dismantle illusions, expose weaknesses, and shift the energy of entire communities without a single word. Their panic, their frustration, and their repeated attacks are just the evidence you've always needed. Your presence cannot be erased, and the truth will always rise above noise. If this message resonated with you, make sure you don't miss what's coming next. Subscribe to the channel so you're always here when the truth is spoken. Like this video to show support for standing firm against opposition. Comment below with your thoughts and experiences. Your story matters. And share this with anyone who needs to see that enduring integrity is the ultimate confirmation of strength. Stay unshakable, because the world notices, even when they don't want to. God bless you. Are you aware of the cost of completely erasing an individual's existence on the black magic underground market? $23,000. That is the exact amount that an individual paid 11 days ago to destroy you using only one photograph. And please don't dismiss this as exaggeration or superstition. Pay close attention. What I'm about to say isn't symbolic, metaphorical, or arbitrary. This message was sent to you as a result of an ongoing event. When you pressed play, you crossed a line and activated forces that you did not intend to use. This is not the voice of dread. This is an example of exposure. This represents the passage of light through an object that was designed to remain hidden. Whether or not you realize it, your life is on the verge of a significant turning point. Currently, hundreds of thousands of people operate in complete obscurity around the world. Disciplined practitioners who have dedicated their entire lives to rituals designed to disrupt destiny itself, rather than curious dabblers or weekend mystics reading cards for fun. They are not cost-effective. They are compensated for the termination of trajectories, the separation of futures, and the disintegration of identities. Additionally, one of them agreed to hire you. She's 68 years old. This skill has been passed down through her family since 1620, as if it were an inheritance of shadows. She honed her precision, perseverance, and confidence over many decades. During her tenure, she completed 4,137 assignments. None of them were unsuccessful. There was no single rebound, until your image came into her possession. On Friday the 13th, at 3:33 a.m., her fingertips made contact with your photograph, eliciting an unexpected response. The situation was not particularly boisterous. It wasn't theatrical. It was definitive. Her confidence couldn't keep up with her body's collapse. She was hospitalized for 7 days due to neurological trauma that no physician could explain, as the incident did not originate in the nervous system. She believed that it came from a higher level of authority that could not be used against her. She was not alone at the end of the evening. A rupture that they could feel but not locate jolted experienced witches from their slumber in 5 different countries, causing them to scream. An ancient phenomenon underwent transformation. A classified item was disturbed. The ground beneath their systems cracked, as the collision could not be contained when a purpose-driven existence is touched by forces that seek to erase it. This is not a terrifying prospect. This relates to revelation. You are not present because you are vulnerable. You are here because you were identified. Like Moses, Joseph's destiny was marred by betrayal before yielding any provision. Deliverance had already been inscribed in his breath, which is why he was targeted in infancy. The resistance was not caused by your vulnerability. It began as a result of your recognition. Instead of destroying you, the object intended to do so revealed the very thing that had been keeping you safe all along. The strike failed because you lacked protection. You are not unclaimed. You are not going unnoticed while navigating life. Something older than curses, more powerful than rituals, and superior to any lineage has already declared you untouchable. The pressure will only increase now that this has been revealed, as awakening always intensifies the battlefield before clearing the path forward. The force unleashed on you was the culmination of 61 years of accumulated force, which was layered and reinforced by entities trained specifically to amplify destruction. It was designed to quietly erode you over time by burrowing in and lingering. However, it failed to comply. It did not make a circular motion. This was not just a rebound. When it came into contact with your field, it was returned sevenfold, precisely multiplied, and carrying the full weight of its own intention. This was not the typical safeguarding. This was the implementation of the law. What surrounds you is not a shield that responds slowly. It's a framework that anticipates. A unique celestial design that is fully activated by only a few living beings on Earth. Long before you learned your own name or breathed your first lament, a system was established that defends by transforming rather than blocking. Each strike counts as evidence. Every weapon serves as evidence. Every force directed at you is repurposed to counteract its source. This is why resistance has often worked against you. What was the cause of the collapse of those who opposed you under duress but were unable to explain? The cause of the lack of confrontation and conflict resolution. This was not an accident. Alignment is the term. It is the manifestation of a higher command that is inextricably linked to your being. Daniel remained in the den, unconcerned, as the threat lost authority. The same as Elijah, who was immune to the substance sent to claim him. The fire is aware when it encounters an object that it cannot consume. The initial reversal did not mark the end of the events that evening. As the seconds passed, the invisible strata responded. Signals crossed domains that are unable to communicate verbally. It was quickly recognized by the occult community. The mere existence of you did not cause the panic to spread. Rather, it revealed a flaw in their reasoning. They cannot enter some people's lives. Some seals are more ancient than their systems. Consequently, those seals cannot be ignored. Your erasure represented a significant personal investment. They paid to silence an entity that disrupts decay by standing upright, because your presence interferes with their plan. They opened as the counterforce returned through the channel. It conveyed clarity, not a disorder. Exposure, not perplexity. The understanding that you are protected by design, not the circumstances. This is why people with negative intentions disperse without explanation. The reason for the settlement of crowded areas upon entry. The reason why conflict loses momentum in your area. These aren't social patterns. These are responses. Seals are currently in motion. The architecture remains unaltered. This pattern will become more apparent as you approach your actual assignment. Because the very thing that keeps you safe also proclaims that you were never meant to be erased. At 11:47 p.m., on Thursday the 22nd, Morgana, a sorceress who changed her name to avoid violating the occult world's enforced silences, received an encrypted message. Your photograph was included in the message. An immediate transfer occurred. $23,000. It is accompanied by a crimson symbol that is easily recognized for its significance. Total destruction with no chance of recovery. This is not a disturbance. Please refrain from postponing. The erasure of all levels of existence. Financial collapse. My health is deteriorating. Detonation of relationships. The psyche is fragmenting inwardly. This was her field of expertise. She was recognized for it. She had dismantled 4,137 lives using photographs as gateways, individually cataloged. Each person was assessed. Her average accomplishment rate was 9.3 out of 10. She was proud of her precision. However, when she saw your image, she felt an emotional upheaval that no ritual could have predicted. Her third eye was clearly swollen. Her breath caught in her chest as she drew the phone away. She later described it as gazing directly into a spiritual sun. An excessive level of brightness. an excessively long life. An excessive quantity. She considered refusal for the first time in her 61-year career. She recognized that this was not typical terrain. However, money is a strong motivator for the ego. The ego is more vocal than dread. There were 4 generations of lineage behind her. Her confidence was boosted by the thousands of completed projects. She had convinced herself that no safeguard was impenetrable. That decision effectively sealed the moment. She opted for excess. She opted for force. To strengthen the action, she summoned the 6 most powerful witches in her coven. The ritual was scheduled for Friday the 13th. Preparations for 7 days began immediately. 7 full days of accumulation. She weakened her body by going without food in order to hone the channel. She sat over ancient tombs in graveyards, meditating on the calm of death. She went to a forest where a serial murderer had buried 7 victims and gathered soil from each location, using each handful as a conduit. Animals were sacrificed. Bone